The Iron Heron raced to Demon Reef. The fishing boats came back without their children. That was how it started. On the grey morning, the village of Sarua Point lost 6 kids in a single low tide. Parents found sandals lined up neatly on the rocks, as if the children had simply stepped out of them and walked into the sea. No screams, no struggle. Just empty shoes and a smear of something black and oily on the stones, already drying in the wind. Kenta Mizushima saw the sandals before anyone called it in. He'd been jogging the shore path since dawn, training the only way he knew how now, alone, before the world woke up and started asking him questions he couldn't answer. He stopped running when he saw them. 6 pairs, side by side, facing the water like their owners had simply dissolved. He didn't need anyone to tell him who'd done it. 3 years ago, Kenta had been an unremarkable second year at a fishing trade school, more interested in engine repair than in anything resembling destiny. Then the cult calling itself the Obsidian Chrysalis had taken him, along with 4 other boys his age, to a converted fish processing plant on the coast, where men in lab coats and ceremonial masks had pumped something black and crystalline into his spine while chanting words that weren't quite any language he recognized. He remembered very little of what came after. Only the cold. Only the sensation of his bones rearranging themselves like furniture in a house he no longer owned. He had escaped before the transformation finished, torn free of the restraints during a generator failure, hurled himself through a window, and woken up 3 days later in a fishing shed with a strange iron weight sitting where his collarbone used to be, fused into him like a coin pressed into wax. The other 4 boys were never found. The processing plant, when investigators finally searched it, was empty, scrubbed clean, abandoned. Kenta told no one what he'd become. He simply noticed, the first time someone threatened him with a knife in an alley, that his hand had closed around the iron weight on his chest and the world had gone very quiet, very fast, and when it came back, he was standing over an unconscious man, encased to the elbow in a strange grey-feathered gauntlet that had not existed 30 seconds earlier. He called what he became the Iron Heron, because that was the shape his arms took, and because herons were patient, solitary birds that struck once and struck true. He didn't bother phoning the police. 3 years of quiet investigation had taught him that the Obsidian Chrysalis owned at least 2 offices in the regional department, maybe more. Instead, he went to the only person he trusted with any of it, old Captain Doma, a retired fisherman with a bad hip and a boat that smelled permanently of diesel and pickled plums. Demon Reef, Doma said, without needing to be asked twice. He was already pulling tarps off his boat, the Kagoida*, a vessel held together by stubbornness and 3 layers of marine paint. Chrysalis bought that reef out from under the co-op 11 years back. Coast Guard won't go near it. Paperwork says it's a private research platform. Government never asks questions when the right envelope changes hands. How far? 40 minutes, if the engine doesn't quit on us again. Doma looked him over, the strange tautness in Kenta's shoulders, the iron-cold calm in his eyes that hadn't been there 3 years ago. You're going out there as you are, or as the other thing? Both, Kenta said. I just don't know in what order yet. The crossing was rough. Doma didn't ask why Kenta kept one hand pressed to his collarbone the entire way, feeling for the weight beneath his shirt like a man checking his own pulse. When the reef came into view, a low black shelf of volcanic rock crowned with a cluster of corrugated buildings that had clearly once been a fish hatchery and just as clearly were not one anymore, Kenta was already moving toward the bow. I can't dock without them seeing us, Doma warned. Then don't dock. Get close and slow down. Doma cut the engine to an idle 100 meters out. Kenta didn't wait for closer. He went over the side in a clean dive, the iron weight on his chest humming faintly against his skin, like a struck tuning fork that hadn't finished ringing. He surfaced near a rusted maintenance ladder and climbed. Inside, the old hatchery had been gutted and rebuilt into something between a chapel and an operating theatre. 6 children sat in a row of restraint chairs, eyes glassy, for lines feeding a black, faintly luminous fluid into their arms. At the far end of the room, a tall man in a ceremonial mask, antlers of black coral lashed above a faceplate shaped like a screaming gull, stood over a console, murmuring numbers to himself. High Warden Ibis, Kenta said, and the man turned. You. The mask tilted, amused. The one who got away. We always wondered if you'd come back to finish what we started, or to stop it. Neither. I'm here to take them home. They're not finished, Ibis said, gesturing at the children with something close to tenderness. The chrysalis doesn't make soldiers from scraps. We need 6. A full clutch. You were going to be the fifth, once, before you ran. I'm not running today. Ibis pressed a switch on the console. From the shadows behind the restraint chairs, something unfolded. 8 feet of jointed black carapace, for-clawed limbs, a face that was mostly mandible and no eyes at all. It moved like a thing assembled rather than born, all hinges and segments, dripping the same black fluid that fed the children's veins. Then you'll meet what you would have become. We call it the hatch warden. Consider it a mirror, boy. Kenta closed his fist around the iron weight on his chest. I've seen worse mirrors. The transformation took him over in a heartbeat, not the slow agony the cult had once tried to force on him, but something he'd claimed for himself, grey feathers of segmented plating racing up his arms and across his shoulders, a beaked visor sealing down over his face, his voice dropping into a register that didn't sound entirely human anymore. Henshin, he said quietly, to no one, the way some people say a prayer. Iron Heron. The hatch warden came at him low and fast, mandibles snapping. Kenta didn't meet it head-on. Herons didn't fight that way. He sidestepped, let the creature's claw rake empty air, and drove his armored forearm up under its jaw hard enough to send it stumbling into the console, sparks raining from a severed cable. You always did move like prey, trying not to look like prey, Ibis said, almost admiring, backing toward an emergency hatch. Pity. We had such plans for that instinct. Save your plans. Kenta caught the hatch warden's second charge on his crossed forearms, the impact jarring up into his teeth, and used the creature's own momentum to throw it sideways into the bank of restraint chairs. Empty ones, thankfully. The children's chairs were on the far wall. I'm only here for the kids. The hatch warden shrieked, a sound like tearing sheet metal, and Kenta felt the iron weight on his chest grow warm, almost insistent, like it wanted him to finish this. He didn't fight the feeling. He simply let it guide his next strike, a single decisive blow to the base of the creature's neck joint, where carapace met whatever passed for spine. The hatch warden folded. Didn't die, exactly, collapsed, the black fluid in its body draining out through cracked plating, the whole construct deflating like a tent with its poles pulled. Ibis was already gone through the hatch by the time Kenta turned around. He let him go. There would be time for High Warden Ibis. There wasn't time to waste chasing a coward through a hatchery while 6 children sat hooked to 4 lines that were still, he now saw, slowly pumping that black fluid into their veins. He tore the lines free one by one, hands gentle even through the armor, murmuring nonsense reassurances. Asterisk almost there, almost done, you're going home asterisk, to children too sedated to answer him. The youngest, a girl no older than 7, opened her eyes halfway as he lifted her into his arms. Are you the monster? She whispered. I used to think so, Kenta admitted, carrying her toward the ladder, the other 5 trailing in a loose, stumbling line behind him, gathered up gently by an arm here, a steadying hand there, until the whole little group moved together, leaning into him like chicks following the one bird in the flock who knew the way out. Lately I've started to think I'm just the thing that monsters are afraid of. Doma brought the asterisk Kagoida asterisk in close enough for Kenta to ferry the children aboard 2 at a time, wading them through the shallows while the tide slapped grey and indifferent against the reef. By the time the sun broke fully over the water, all 6 were wrapped in spare tarps and fishermen's coats, shivering but breathing, blinking the black fog out of their eyes 1 slow minute at a time. Hatchery's not going anywhere, Doma said, steering them back towards Sarua Point. Reckon someone official might finally take an interest, once 6 kids turn up alive with a story like that. Maybe. Kenta sat at the stern, human again, the iron weight cool and quiet against his collarbone, watching the black reef shrink behind them. Or maybe it'll just close up shop somewhere else, and I'll be having this same morning again in a year. Then you'll have this same morning again in a year, Doma said simply, lighting a cigarette against the wind. Worse mornings to have, I figure. At least this one ends with the kids going home. Kenta didn't answer. He just watched the coastline of Sarua Point come up out of the haze, 6 pairs of empty sandals waiting on the rocks for feet that, this time, were coming back to fill them.